Salak. I don't even know if the whole first sit down is going to load, but Salak, I went over by 15 minutes. All right, but moving forward, it says page 131. Peter Martyr wrote of this scene of Columbus's first encounters with a golden world. It is stated that these islands formerly abounded in various products which constituted their riches. So the Israelites here was rich. I say formerly, for they are now deserted, because the white man killed us off. The reason for this is that large numbers of the wretched islanders were transported to the gold mines of Hispaniola and Fernandina, otherwise known as Cuba, when the native inhabitants there were exterminated, exhausted by disease and famine, as well as by excessive labor. 1200,000 of them disappeared. 1200,000. All right. Now, further proving that the so-called Native Americans are Israelites, among Las Casas' most direct successors in this creed, the vision of the Indian destiny as a Jewish one is far more explicit, for they will see the New World natives as descendants of the lost tribes of Israel. Now, one more little excerpt I want to read about that. Page 187. At first, this tendency appears only as a fervent search for the Jewish analogies provoked by Aztec customs, such as the eating of only unleavened bread on certain days of the year, the prohibition of drinking liquids after the eating of certain ritual foods, and the use of baths for purification. In time, this begins to seem to Duran like overwhelming evidence that the Indians are indeed descended from the lost tribes of Israel, and he opens his last and most important work, The History of the Indies of New Spain, with an unqualified assertion to this effect. In this way, even certain fundamental legends can be explained, such as the one that Montezuma presented to Cortez. The departure of the great lord in antiquity now seems to Duran to be a memory of Moses. All right, so that just goes to show now. I also want to prove that the children of Israel and the children of Judah were oppressed together. One does not hear of black slaves in the New World obtaining their freedom within an organized society during this period. Why? Because so-called black people that went to freedom fought for freedom. The only perceptible quantity of free blacks were runaways. So in other words, you had individual so-called black free men, as they called them, but then when you could see a whole bunch of so-called black people, they were runaways. That were black people that were free. Right? It says the Cimarrones, so-called because they tended to live in rebel bands in the fastness of mountaintops, cimas in Spanish. The English would later transform this name into Maroons, perhaps grasping at the hint of color that it conveyed to their ears. These bands often were made up of not only blacks, not only Judah, but also of Indians who had run away from Spanish oppression. So the so-called Hispanics also, or Native Americans. And the fusion between them was in many cases producing a new race of men, one that was usually troublesome to Spanish rule. So that goes to show the scripture that says the children of Israel and the children of Judah were oppressed together. For you dumb motherfuckers out there that put Spanish people on blast, so-called Hispanics on blast. Drake's alliance, page 219, Drake's alliance with these communities of escaped blacks and Indians, talking about the same maroon camps, and their crossbred children living in the forests of the Isthmus, inherited by him from French captains still influential in the area, was a stroke of great cleverness on his part, since no other people at once knew the countryside so well and hated the Spaniards so thoroughly. Oh, because we hated them fucking those were the real spics, the fucking piece of shit conquistadors. The spirit, going back to page 178, the spiritual conquest of Mexico began almost immediately after the military one. So they had already defeated us militarily. Now they're sending their fucking faggot-ass priest after us to teach us that bullshit. In May of 1524, 12 Franciscan friars of the Observantine order, thenceforth to be known widely as the 12 Disciples, landed at San Juan de Ulua, and retracing the path of Cortez' march as well as they knew how, walked up to Mexico City. You know, that's pretty self-explanatory. Fast forward, page 188. Let's see. In Peru, in the 1560s and 70s, a Dominican friar named called Francisco de la Cruz had declared himself a messiah of a new world Christianity, which had to fight a war to the death against the Indians in order to bring on the final redemption, because they were the lost tribes of Israel. He was finally burned at the stake by the Inquisition in 1578. Geronimo de Mendieta, born in 1525, was a more truly Franciscan apocalyptist who believed that the mission among Indians would produce a perfection of Christianity that would help to usher in the end of days. Self-explanatory. Bringing in the so-called 10 tribes would help bring in the last days, the end of days. All right. Going to show how so-called Negroes and so-called Hispanics, or in this case Brazilians, were similar. Page 215. Brazilian and Negro were equally strange, but both evidently were honest merchants as far as William Hawkins was concerned. All right, what else? Let's see. 217, page 217. Yet there remains something peculiarly dispassionate and, in the English manner, businesslike in the racial attitudes that seem to permeate. Well, let me get to the point. Here we go. These men also are more civil than any other because of their daily traffic with the Frenchmen. This is talking about Guineans and Cape Verdeans, right? So it says, our very nature gentle and loving. The men thus described seem far more congenial than the Chichimecs of Panuco in northern Mexico, as described by Miles Phillips, one of Hawkins' sailors stranded in that region in 1568. He saw them as a warlike kind of people, which are in a manner as cannibals, although they do not feed upon man's flesh as cannibals do. So he looked at the Mexican Indians as cannibals, but they did not actually practice cannibalism. Yeah, they just basically acted like cannibals, which makes no fucking sense. But anyway, now the Native Americans compared to the Curse of Ham. Check this out. New England, on the other hand, was perfectly capable in 1640 of entertaining thoughts of having Indians rooted out as being of the cursed race of Ham. According to John Winthrop, this is a rare instance of that notion of racial taint being applied to the Indians. So the Indians, they were saying that they suffered from the curse of Ham, as they say so-called black people suffer from the curse of Ham. So it goes to show how there's similarities between the Native Americans and the so-called blacks. Right? Now I'm going to read through page 30. I'm going to try to read it within the next 6 minutes so that I don't have to upload a third video, you know, and make it long for y'all. All right. In September 1644, a Portuguese Marrano named Antonio de Montesinos arrived in Amsterdam after having lived for some years in South America, and proceeded to tell the leaders of the recently established Jewish community there in Amsterdam that a story that caused them to think of him as a latter-day Eldad the Danite. 2.5 years before, he told them while traveling in the wild mountains of Quito. Quito is, I believe, I forgot what country, it's in Central America. He had heard some of his Indian guides remark that the natives of this country deserved all the suffering they had undergone at the hands of the Spaniards. All right, let's see. All right, here we go. Praying for salvation. There's Montesinos right here. In his cell one day, he was reciting what was by then a standard formula among New World Marranos. Blessed be the name of the Lord, who has not made me an idolater, a barbarian, a Negro, or an Indian. When suddenly be stopped, those Indians, he told themselves, they are Hebrews. Reading on forward a little bit. The woman got off and spoke to Francisco in an Indian tongue that Montesinos could not understand, although he could perceive that he was being identified in the conversation. She then turned to her male companions and to explain the situation. Upon hearing her words, they rose, went over to Montesinos, and to his utter astonishment said, Shema Yisroel, Adonai El Eloheinu, Adonai Ehad. Hear, O Israel, the Lord our God, the Lord is one. They had recited in Hebrew the fundamental credo of Judaism. They told him that they were themselves of the tribe of Reuben, and that the tribe of Joseph lived on an island nearby. They were willing to make an exception in the near future, however, on account of their need for education, for though they spoke Hebrew, they could not read nor write it. Only the sorcerers of this tribe had perceived that they were a special people, just like Deuteronomy 14. Damn, I'm getting old. Oh, 7 and 6. And I believe 14 and 2. Just like both those scriptures say. That the God of these children of Israel is the true God. They had said, and everything inscribed on their tablets is true. At the end of days, they will be the lords of all the nations of the earth. Deuteronomy 7 and 6. One nation will come bringing many things to this land, and after we have all been provided for, these children of Israel will go forth from where they now are and reign over the whole earth as they once did. So this proves that the so-called natives were part of the rulership of the world at one point. With this final flourish, Montesinos had turned his tale of the lost tribes into a bit of propaganda for the Dutch conquest of Brazil at the same time. All right, reading forward. Let's see. Or it talks about Manasseh ben Israel, which, if you remember, I read the book Indians, the Jews, and the Hope of Israel together. Let's see. Is there anything else good in here? Okay, here we go. Page 368. But Mather certainly recognized the power of a vision that eventually enabled Eliot to translate the entire Bible into the Algonquin tongue, a great, though inevitably obscure, effort of early American literature, which surely reflects on every page Eliot's sense of deep-lying affinities between the Indian language and Hebrew, between the Indian and the Jewish spirits. I mean, that's pretty self-explanatory. You know, let me just read through the rest. Oh no, that's it. That's it on that. All right. So with that, I'm gonna say all praises, honor, and glory to Yahweh Ba'Hashim Yahushai. Double honors to the apostles and elders of Great Millstone. Salutations to you brothers throughout the four corners of the earth, teaching the truth and righteousness and sincerity. To you Israelite foreigners, come back home to the truth. To those that passed away serving the Lord, the dead in Yahushua, shall arise first. Shalom.